Released in the arcades in March 1997, this installment is considered the best Tekken of all time. It will be released to the PlayStation in Japan in March, North America in April, and Europe in November 1998, going on to sell 5.5 million copies worldwide. This would also be the final release of the game series for the original PlayStation, as further Tekken games were released on the PlayStation 2. With 7 returning characters from Tekken 2, there was a whopping 16 new characters incorporated into this game. Namco also incorporated a Streets of Rage style street fight, where you needed to progress through the stages in order to unlock further characters, which was a brilliant addition to the game series. Great fighting game, and would have been heavily anticipated by many people on Christmas morning. Another smash hit for the Final Fantasy series of games. Released in the early part of 1999, this game was still selling strong at the Christmas period. It again saw a huge marketing campaign, and this game went on to sell over 8 million copies in its lifetime. It's also worth mentioning that this was the fastest selling Final Fantasy game of all time, earning more than $50 million in sales over the first 3 months of its release. This would only be eclipsed by the release of Final Fantasy XIII in 2010. The game's storyline focuses on a group of young mercenaries who are drawn into an international conflict, and they seek to protect the world from a sorceress who's manipulating the war for her own purposes. A must-have gift for any Final Fantasy fan back in 1999. Between the years of 1999 and 2004, Pokemon games were released at the fast pace for the Game Boy to run alongside the popular TV series and card collecting games. Now, instead of doing small videos on each of these titles, I thought it would be for the best that I covered these games together, as they are much the same game and centred around players guiding their character through different overhead perspective quests and battles whilst mastering the Pokemon battles. These games were Pokemon Yellow, which sold over 10 million copies, Pokemon Gold and Silver, which sold nearly 18 million copies, Pokemon Crystal, which sold 6 million, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, which sold 15.4 million, Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green, which sold 10.5 million copies, and Pokemon Emerald, which sold just over 6 million copies. As you can tell, these games are massively successful and would have made many kids happy over the festive period. Now, I've decided to move this game from 2000 to 2001, as it saw the European release and Australian release at this time, which ultimately led to it selling so many copies. Unlike installments of the Final Fantasy series before, this game failed to sell as well, selling over 5 million copies worldwide. This installment of the popular Final Fantasy series centred around a young thief named Zidane Tribble, who joins with several others to defeat Queen Alexandria, who has started a war. Final Fantasy IX was voted the 24th best game of all time by readers of Japanese magazine Famitsu, and the 42nd best game by users of the website Game FAQs. This game has also achieved an average review score of 94% on Metacritic, the highest score that a Final Fantasy game has ever recorded on this site. And it's also worth mentioning that it received 93% on Game Rankings, the second highest of any Final Fantasy title, behind Final Fantasy III for the SNES. Released in Japan on the 28th of April and in North America and Europe in July, this was a critical and commercial success, going on to become one of the best-selling console games of all time. As with the installment before, the object of the game was to complete races against other drivers in order to win championships and money in order to buy cars and upgrades. Whilst winning championships, you would unlock tracks and cars which you could use to race friends in 2-player mode or buy in 1-player mode to use against competitors in championship races. Races vary from short beginner events to multi-hour endurance races, with rallying events also available on this edition of the game. In addition, the car shops on this game are now organised by the country of origin for the manufacturer. One of the major drawbacks to this game, with only 180 compared to the 650 cars that were on Gran Turismo 2, you still had a pretty big choice. But that said, this game more than made up for it with the improved graphics from earlier releases. This game was highly praised by game reviewers and players as one of the best racing games ever made. IGN scored GT3 a 9.8 out of 10 and GameSpot rated it 9.4 out of 10. It also received a Platinum Award from the Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine, and it's also worth mentioning that Gran Turismo 3 currently has a 94% rating on GameRankings.com at the time of the making of this video. So all in all, this is another awesome game for the PS2, which will become a must-have game over the festive period. Released on the 22nd of October 2001, this would be the first 3D installment of the Grand Theft Auto series of games. As with all the games in this series, it was surrounded with much controversy due to the amount of violence involved during the game. This wouldn't really hinder the game's popularity, however, as it went on to sell a massive 12 million copies and win countless number of awards in the coming years. It's also worth mentioning that GTA 3 was banned in Australia for a certain amount of time after the game's release, and it's also the reason why many people now get ID'd for many games that they buy in supermarkets and other game retailers, as this game was considered to be so bad that retailers feared the game getting into the wrong hands, which would have ultimately ended up in lawsuits down the line should anything have happened. The storyline to GTA 3 is that your character is based in Liberty City, a fictional metropolitan city based on New York City. Your character is betrayed by his girlfriend during a bank heist and is required to work his way up the crime ladder of the city before confronting her. Whilst going through the missions, you will work with many gangsters around the island, carry out many drive-bys, rob many stores and offices, steal many cars whilst engaging with local civilians in pointless fights. This game was such a turning point in the GTA series of games and is still as challenging and popular today as it was on its original release. In fact, online gaming site Game Radar named this as the most important game of the decade. Praised as being one of the most important games of all time, this first-person shooter was one of the biggest reasons the original Xbox did so well. Released everywhere on the 15th of November 2001, it would go on to sell 6 million copies and go on to see many sequels in the coming years. The storyline to Halo is that you're a cybermatically enhanced super soldier who's accompanied by Cortana, an artificially intelligent who occupies the Master Chief's neural interface. Players battle through various aliens on foot and in vehicles as they attempt to uncover the secrets of an artificial planet. Touted as a game that's easy to pick up and get into, Halo focuses on combat in 3D environments, whilst taking place almost entirely from a character's eye view. The player can move around and look up, down, left or right, with the game also featuring vehicles ranging from armoured jeeps and tanks to alien hovercrafts and aircraft, many of which can be controlled by the player. The game switches to a third-person perspective during vehicle use. For pilots and mounted gun operations, passengers maintain a first-person view. There really is no reason that this game shouldn't be on this list, and it would have left many Xbox owners very happy on Christmas morning. Being the fourth game of the series, this installment follows Snake as he sets out to take back an offshore cleanup facility that has been seized by a group of terrorists called the Sons of Liberty. Never before would a Metal Gear game require you to sneak around and avoid being seen so much. Players can now walk slowly, allowing them to sneak over noisy flooring without making a sound, or hang off walkways to slip past the guards walking above. The corner press move from the original title, which allowed players to sneak a peek around the corner, was expanded during this title to allow you to fire from cover as well. Enemies in this game were also given better AI, making for a much more difficult and challenging installment to the series. Due to these points, this game would become a huge success, selling over 7 million copies worldwide, whilst also receiving rave reviews from gamers and the gaming press.